Chapter 1. He arrived on a morning in early autumn when the leaves had not yet decided what color they wanted to be. I was on the roof of my house fixing a tile that had been wrong since the last storm. I had been putting it off for 2 weeks because the ladder made me nervous, and I was stubborn about asking for help. I was 26 years old, and I lived alone in my grandmother's house at the edge of the forest, and I had been managing alone for 3 years, and I was not going to stop because of one tile. I heard the gate. My gate had a specific sound. Old iron, slightly loose on the left hinge, it made a noise that was different depending on how it was opened. Quickly it was a clang, slowly it was a long groan. This was somewhere between, deliberate, someone who was paying attention to how they moved through the world. I looked down from the roof. He was tall, tan skin and silver hair that was unusual on someone who looked that young, not white with age but silver the way certain metals were silver, and blue eyes that were looking up at me on the roof with an expression I could not read from that distance. He was dressed simply, traveling clothes, a pack over one shoulder. I asked what he wanted. He said he was looking for work. He said he had heard there was a house at the edge of the forest that needed a hand, and he had hands and was willing to use them. I looked at him for a moment, then I looked at the tile I had been fighting with for 20 minutes. I told him to come up. He came up the ladder without hesitation. He moved differently from most people, not dramatically, just with a specific quality of ease in his body that was not quite normal, like someone for whom gravity was a suggestion rather than a rule. He came up the ladder and crouched beside the tile and looked at it, and without asking permission picked it up and said it correctly in 30 seconds. I stared at the tile. I asked his name. He said Iron. I said my name was Mara. I said the tile had been giving me trouble for 20 minutes. He said he could see that. He said it without any superiority in it, which I appreciated. He was just observing. I asked where he had come from. He said east. He said it the way people said things when east was the direction and not a full answer, and I noted this and did not push it. I told him I could not pay much. I told him there was a room in the back of the house and meals and a small wage, and the work was whatever needed doing, because in a house alone for 3 years, a great deal of things needed doing. He said that was acceptable. I said all right. I said he could start with the other 3 tiles on the north face that were also wrong. He smiled. It was a brief smile, like it had surprised him. He fixed the tiles, all 4 of them. By mid-morning, the roof was better than it had been since my grandmother died. I stood in the garden looking up at it and felt something loosen in my chest that I had not noticed was tight. I made lunch. He came down and washed his hands at the outside pump, and I noticed that the water seemed not to bother him the way it bothered most people in the cold of early autumn. He did not flinch or hurry. He ran the cold water over his hands like it was nothing. I put food on the table. He sat across from me and ate with the specific quality of someone who was very hungry but was not going to show it. He ate everything. He did not ask for more. I gave him more anyway. That was the first day. Chapter 2. He was extraordinary at everything. I want to be precise about this because extraordinary was a word I did not use lightly. I had been managing a house and a small piece of land for 3 years, and I knew what competence looked like. I had been competent myself slowly, through effort and failure and trying again. He was different. He picked up every task as if he had done it before and done it many times, and was simply doing it again in different circumstances. The fence at the edge of the property had been leaning for a year. He fixed it in an afternoon. The well mechanism that my grandmother had been meaning to replace for years, and that I had been ignoring, was replaced in a morning. He built a new woodshed over 3 days with lumber I had not gotten around to using, and when it was done, it was perfectly proportioned and oriented correctly to catch the prevailing wind in a way that meant the wood would season properly. I had not told him about the prevailing wind. He had known. I thought about that. He was quiet in the way that I was quiet, not silent. He spoke when there was something to say, and he did not fill the rest with noise. In the evenings after the work was done, he would sit by the fire with whatever book he had taken from the shelf and read until the fire needed banking, and then bank it and go to his room. The books he chose were old ones: history, geography, natural philosophy from 300 years ago. He read them like they were recent. He did not ask questions about my life. This was unusual. Most people who came to a house and stayed in it asked questions. Where was my family? Why was I alone? How had I come to be living at the edge of a forest at 26? He did not ask any of this. He did his work, and he ate, and he read, and he was present in the way that someone was present when they had decided to be here and had no uncertainty about the decision. I noticed things about him. The cold did not bother him. This was the first thing I had noticed on the first day, and it continued. Autumn became colder, and he went out in it without a coat sometimes. Early in the mornings, when he thought I was not awake yet, I was usually awake. I watched from the kitchen window. He stood in the cold early morning and looked at the forest, and his breath did not miss the way mine would have. I thought I was imagining this. I looked more carefully. I was not imagining it. He was stronger than he looked. This was the second thing. He moved lumber that should have required two people. He did not strain. He did not make anything of it. He simply picked things up and moved them. I watched him carry a full water barrel one-handed across the yard, and then noticed him notice me watching, and he set it down with both hands and carried on as if that had been the plan. He paid attention to the forest. He was always oriented toward it, not anxiously, not with the quality of someone who was afraid of what was in it, with the quality of someone who was monitoring something they understood. Occasionally he would stop what he was doing and look at the trees for a moment and then go back to the work. I asked once what he was looking at. He said nothing. He said it without lying. I could tell he was not lying. He was looking at nothing specifically. He was attending to the whole. He healed fast. At the end of the second week, he caught the back of his hand on a nail, and the cut was deep enough that I insisted on bandaging it. I cleaned it and wrapped it, and 2 days later I checked, and the wound was almost gone. Not healed the normal amount. Almost gone. He said he healed fast. I said I could see that. Neither of us said anything else about it. By the end of the first month, the house was more functional than it had been in 3 years. The roof was sound. The fence was straight. The woodshed was full. The well worked properly. The garden had been prepared for winter in a way I would not have managed alone before the first frost. I sat at the kitchen table on the last evening of October and looked at the fire and thought about the man in the back room who healed too fast and did not feel the cold and knew things about prevailing winds he had not been told. I thought about it for a long time, and then I went to bed. I slept better than I had in months. Chapter 3. My grandmother had told me about dragons. She had told me many things. She was the kind of woman who had many things to tell and who had kept most of them until the very end, rationing them out in the final months when she understood that she was almost out of time and still had things I needed to know. She told me about the forest and what lived in it and what did not. She told me about the old agreements between the people of the valley and the things that were older than the valley. She told me about what to leave at the edge of the forest and when and why. She told me about dragons specifically on one of the last evenings when she was still lucid enough to be precise. She said they were old, older than the kingdom, older than the language the kingdom used. She said they were curious and that the curiosity was the most dangerous thing about them because curiosity led them to things they then became attached to, and attachment was complicated when one party was mortal and the other was not. She said they took human form sometimes. She said you could usually tell. She said you could not always tell. I had listened to all of this the way I listened to things my grandmother said in those final months, carefully and with the understanding that the words mattered even when I did not yet know why. I had not thought about it again until November. In November, I went to the market in the nearest town. It was a full day's walk, and I usually went twice a year. I took the cart. Iron offered to come. I said yes because the cart was heavy, and the road was bad after the autumn rain, and 2 people were better than 1. We went to the market, and I sold what I had to sell and bought what I needed to buy, and he carried things and navigated and was useful in all the practical ways. The market was busy. Crowded, the kind of crowd that had noise and smell and the specific chaos of many people in a small space. He moved through it differently. People moved out of his way, not because he pushed. They simply moved, like water finding the path around a stone. A dog ran at us from between 2 stalls. A large dog, frightened by something, running without looking. It stopped when it reached Iron. It stopped completely. It looked up at him, and then it turned around and went back the way it had come. I watched this. On the walk home, I thought about everything I had observed in 2 months. The cold, the strength, the wound, the forest attention, the way people moved around him, the dog. I put them all in a line, and I looked at the line. I thought about my grandmother and what she had said on one of the last evenings. We reached the house at dusk. I made food. He sat at the table across from me and ate. I looked at him across the table. Tan skin and silver hair and blue eyes that were reading me the way they always read everything. Attentive and thorough. I said his eyes were an unusual color. He said yes. I said I had never seen that shade of blue before. I said it was like looking through very deep water. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said it was a family trait. He said it without lying. I could always tell when he was lying because he never did. I said all right. I washed the dishes and banked the fire and went to bed. I was not ready to say it out loud yet, but I knew. Chapter 4. The valley winters were long and hard, and the house was small enough that two people in it for months became familiar with each other in ways that larger spaces and shorter winters would not have allowed. He was a good person to be cold with. That was how I thought about it. There was a specific skill to being confined with someone through a long winter without either person making the other feel the confinement. He had it. He occupied his space and left mine alone. He was present without being intrusive. He knew when I wanted to talk and when I did not, and he responded to both correctly without my having to signal either. We read in the evenings. He always had a book. I usually had my embroidery or my accounts or one of the small projects that accumulated during the active months and got attention in the cold ones. We sat by the fire and we were in the same room, and the same room was comfortable in the specific way that a room with the right person in it was comfortable. He cooked sometimes. He was better at it than he should have been. He made things with the ingredients available in a winter kitchen that I would not have thought to make. I asked him once where he had learned. He said he had learned from watching. He said it simply, like watching was a sufficient explanation. For him, I was beginning to understand. Watching usually was. I told him things during the winter, not because I had decided to, because the winter and the firelight and the specific intimacy of a long cold season did what they always did and made honesty easier than it was in the active months. I told him about my grandmother and what she had been and what she had taught me and what she had kept until the end. I told him about the 3 years alone and what they had been. Hard at first and then manageable, and then something I was almost proud of. I told him about the tile on the roof that I had been fighting with the morning he arrived, and how much it had mattered to me to fix it myself, and how much it had also mattered that he fixed it in 30 seconds. He listened to all of it without interrupting. When I finished, he said something. He said that the tile had been fixed. He said that me trying to fix it alone and him arriving at the right moment were not in opposition. He said both things were true and neither canceled the other. I looked at him across the fire. I said that was a very precise way to look at it. He said he had found that precision was usually more useful than comfort when someone was trying to understand something real. I sat with that for a while. He told me things too, not large things, small specific ones. The way he described places was always from the outside first, the shape of a valley from above, the way a river looked from a cliff, the way forests looked from over the tops of the trees. I noticed this and filed it. He described food the way someone described it, who was tasting it for the first time each time. He described cold the way someone described something they had observed rather than experienced. He described human things with the specific quality of attention of someone who found human things interesting rather than ordinary. In January, he sat by the fire one evening and said that the forest was quiet tonight. I had not heard anything from the forest. I had not been listening. He had been listening without appearing to listen. I asked if the forest was usually loud. He said no. He said quiet was different from the usual quiet. He said the usual quiet had things in it. This quiet was empty. I asked what that meant. He said something was staying out tonight. He said it was a habit of certain creatures that were aware of other certain creatures. I thought about that. I said I did not know what he meant. He said that was fine. He said it without condescension. He went back to his book. The fire crackled. Outside the forest was empty. Inside the fire was warm. I understood what he meant. Chapter 5. February was the hardest month. The cold was at its deepest, and the stores were at their lowest, and the days were still short enough that the darkness felt like a presence rather than an absence. I had been through 2 February winters alone, and both of them had been difficult in the specific grinding way of the last stretch of a long effort. This February was different, not easier in the practical sense. The cold was the same cold. The supplies were as careful as always, but I was not alone, and the not alone was a different shape entirely. He woke before me every morning. I usually heard him before I got up, the sound of the fire being rebuilt, the water being put on, small domestic sounds that had become the texture of the mornings. I lay in bed and listened to them and felt something that I did not examine too carefully. One morning in the middle of February, I woke to silence. The fire sounds were not there. I got up and went to the kitchen, and the fire was built and the water was on and the kitchen was empty. I looked through the window. He was in the garden. It was before dawn, still dark except for the snow on the ground catching whatever light came from the sky. He was standing in the middle of the garden in the cold that was the most severe cold of the year, and he was not wearing a coat. His silver hair caught the faint light. His face was turned up toward the sky. I stood at the window and watched. He stood like that for a long time, not moving, not obviously cold, not anything except present, like the cold was nothing, like the darkness was nothing, like whatever was in the sky was something he was attending to with the same thoroughness he attended to everything. Then he turned around and looked at the window. He could not have known I was there. The kitchen was dark and the window reflected the outside, and there was no way to see inside from where he was standing. And yet he turned and looked directly at the window and at me. I stepped back from the window. My heart was doing something. He came in a few minutes later. He did not say anything about the garden or the sky or the window. He made tea. He set a cup in front of me. He sat across from me and wrapped both hands around his own cup and looked at the fire. I said, "What were you looking at?" He said, "The stars." I said, "It was cloudy." He said, "Yes." I thought about that. I thought about eyes that could see through clouds. I thought about skin that did not mind the deepest cold of the year. I thought about my grandmother and what she had said, and about all the months of watching and filing, and understanding more and more of the shape of it. I wrapped my hands around my tea. I said his name. He looked at me. I said I had been thinking about something for a while. He said I could say it. I said I thought I knew what he was. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, the February morning was being the coldest morning of the year. Inside, the fire was warm and small, and the tea was hot, and he was sitting across from me with those blue eyes that were deep and old, and looking at me with an expression I had not seen before. Not alarmed, not defensive, something more complicated than either, something that looked like relief underneath the complication. He said, "What do you think I am?" I said it. One word, simple. The word my grandmother had used on one of the last evenings when she had still been lucid enough to be precise. He looked at me for a long time. Then he said, "Yes." Chapter 6. I did not run. I want to be clear about that. I was frightened, not of him exactly, more of the size of what I had just confirmed, the gap between what I had been assuming about the world and what the world apparently was. That gap was large, and standing at the edge of it was frightening. But I did not run. I asked him questions. I had a list of them in my head that had been building for months, and now that the door was open, I went through them. I asked how old he was. He said he was not sure. He said time moved differently for his kind. He said the best approximation he had was several hundred years, but that the number was imprecise because the counting was difficult when the perspective on time was different. I thought about that. Several hundred years. He looked 30. I asked why he had come here, to this house, to work as a servant for a woman he had never met. He was quiet for a moment. He was honest with me in that moment the way he was honest with me about everything. He said he had been watching the forest for a long time. He said this valley was within the range he moved through, and he had been through it many times. He said my grandmother had known what he was, and they had had an understanding. He said when she died he had been aware of it. He said he had been aware of me afterward. He said he had watched me manage the house alone for 3 years. He said on the morning he arrived, he had seen me on the roof with the tile. He stopped there, like that was the explanation, like watching me fight with a roof tile for 20 minutes had been the thing that decided it. I said that was why he had come, the tile. He said it was part of why. I said what was the rest. He looked at me across the kitchen table in the February morning. The blue eyes were doing the complicated thing they did when he was being honest about something difficult. He said the rest was that he had been watching this valley for a long time, and this house specifically, and the people in it, and he had found himself wanting to be in it rather than watching it. He said that was unusual for him. He said he had learned not to ignore unusual. I sat with that. Then I asked the practical question. I asked what happened now. He said that was up to me. He said he would understand if I wanted him to leave. He said he would understand if I had questions he had not answered. He said he would understand if the knowledge changed things. I looked around the kitchen, the fire he had built before dawn, the tea he had made, the house that was more functional than it had been in years, the months of winter that had been different from the two before. I said the only thing that had changed was that I knew. I said knowing was better than not knowing. He looked at me for a moment, then something in his face did the thing it had done the first time I gave him more food, like something had surprised him, like he had expected a different answer and gotten mine instead. I picked up my tea, he picked up his. Outside February continued being February, inside the fire was still warm. He stayed. Chapter 7. The work continued. This was the thing I had not expected. I had thought the truth would make everything feel different, change the quality of the ordinary days, make the house feel like a different place. It did not. He still fixed things. I still cooked. We still sat by the fire in the evenings with our respective books. The mornings were still the mornings. What changed was that I stopped noticing things and filing them away. I stopped because there was nothing left to file. I knew. Everything I observed now went straight into the category of understanding rather than the category of evidence. It was a lighter way to be in the same space. He was different too, slightly, not dramatically. He was a little less careful. The care he had been taking about the cold and the strength and the things that did not fit had been a layer of management that was now gone. He did not perform ordinary in the same way. He still performed it because performing it was what he had come here to do, and we had not discussed changing that. But the performance was looser. He did not flinch at himself anymore. I asked him things, not in one long conversation. Gradually, the questions arrived when they arrived, and he answered them when I asked. I asked what the forest looked like from above. He was quiet for a moment, then he described it, the specific way the canopy looked from a great height in different seasons, the way rivers looked from above, not like rivers at all, but like something liquid and deliberate moving through the land with its own intention, the way valleys like this one held weather differently from the open land, gathered clouds, kept warmth, created microclimates that were specific to that valley and nowhere else. He described all of this with the specific precision of someone who had seen it, not imagined it, seen it. I listened and thought about the sky above the clouds on the February morning. I asked if he missed it, the sky. He said yes, he said it simply, not dramatically, just yes. I asked why he was still here then. He was quiet for longer this time. He said because here was where he wanted to be. I looked at the fire, he looked at the fire. Neither of us said anything else for a while. In March the snow started to melt. The first green appeared at the edges of the garden, and the birds came back, and the days grew longer in the specific incremental way of early spring that was always more moving than it had any right to be. He noticed all of it. He pointed things out the way he always had. The first flower in the corner by the wall, the specific angle of the morning light, the sound the creek made when it had more water in it. I had lived in this valley my whole life. I had been seeing these things every spring. He made me see them again. I told him this one morning. I said he made me see things I had stopped seeing. He said that was because he had not stopped seeing them. He said you did not stop seeing things when you had been paying attention to them for several hundred years. He said they kept being exactly what they were. I said that sounded exhausting. He said it was the opposite of exhausting. I thought about that for a long time. Chapter 8. We planted the garden together. This was my favorite part of the year and had been since I was small. The specific optimism of putting seeds in the ground, the particular quality of spring soil that smelled like everything that had been composting over the winter, releasing into the air. The way the garden changed from the bare, careful rows of planting to the chaotic abundance of summer if you had done it right. I showed him how I did it. He watched carefully and then did it carefully. He was good at everything, I had established this, but with planting he was slower than with the physical tasks. He treated the seeds with a specific attention that was different from how he treated lumber or stone, like they were more significant, like something about them mattered to him in a way the other work did not. I asked him about this. He said he had not planted things before. He said in several hundred years he had watched many things grow, but had not been the one to put them in the ground. I said there was something about it that he found significant. He said yes, he said that putting something in the ground and waiting for it was an act of specific faith. He said that faith of that kind was unusual. He said most things that lasted a long time did not require faith. They simply continued. Something small and fragile put in the ground in spring was different. It might not come up. You did not know. You did it anyway. I looked at him crouching in the turned soil with a seed in his hand. I said I had never thought about it that way. He said most people who did it all their lives did not think about it that way. He said that was the specific privilege of a perspective from the outside. You saw things the insiders had stopped seeing because they were too close. I thought about him watching this valley for a long time, watching it from the outside. I said I thought it went both ways. He looked at me. I said sometimes the inside perspective was the one that mattered. He could describe what the forest looked like from above. I could tell him what it smelled like after rain. Both were the forest. Both were true. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said I was right. We planted the rest of the garden in comfortable silence. In the evenings of that spring, I noticed the space between us at the fire had gotten smaller, not by design, by accumulation. The winter had built a familiarity, and the spring was settling it into something more permanent. He sat closer. I did not move away. He handed me things without being asked. I handed him things without being asked. The small currencies of two people who had become accustomed to each other. One evening, I fell asleep in my chair by the fire. It happened. The days were full, and the season was turning, and sometimes the warmth and the quiet got ahead of the intention to stay awake. I woke when he set a blanket over me. He had done it carefully. He was already going back to his chair. I said his name. He looked at me. I said thank you. He sat back down and picked up his book. He did not say anything, but the something careful in his face that I had noticed since the first morning was different that evening, like it was holding something different from what it had been holding before. I closed my eyes again and let the fire do what fires did. Chapter 9. By the time the garden was in full growth, I had understood something about myself that I had been careful not to examine too directly for several months. I looked forward to the mornings because of him, not because the mornings had changed, because he was in them. I noticed what he noticed and found what he found interesting to be interesting, not because I had decided to, because it was, because the quality of his attention to things was a quality that transferred. When he looked at something carefully, it became worth looking at carefully. I had started saving things to tell him, a thought I had in the garden, something one of the town women had said when I went for supplies, a book I had read that I thought he would have opinions about. I saved these things the way you saved things for someone who would appreciate them. I knew what this was. I was not in a hurry to do anything about it. He was several hundred years old, and a dragon and my grandmother had said attachment was complicated when one party was mortal and the other was not. I was aware of all of this. I held it all, and I continued living my life, and I was not going to make anything of what I felt before I understood it better. He did not make anything of it either. He was careful with me in the same way he had always been careful with me, careful about the space between us, never assuming, always giving room. I had started to find this both respectful and maddening, which told me something about where I was. One evening in summer, I was on the roof again. The roof was fine now, all the tiles were right, but I liked being up there in the summer evenings when the light was good. I could see the valley from up there, the way the fields sat in it, and the way the forest was dark at the edges, and the specific quality of summer evening light that made everything look like it was lit from the inside. He came and stood at the base of the ladder. He looked up at me. He said the view was better from higher. I said I was sure it was. I said I was working with what I had. He said he could show me. He said it carefully, like he was offering something and was aware that what he was offering was not ordinary. I sat on the roof and looked at him for a moment. Then I said yes. He came up the ladder. He sat beside me on the roof. He pointed at specific things in the valley below and described them the way he had described the forest from above in February, what they looked like from a height, what the valley looked like as a whole from above, what you could see from high up that you could not see from the ground. I listened and looked at what he was pointing at and built the picture from both versions, his and mine, the high and the low, the outside and the inside. We sat on the roof until the light was gone. He was very close. Our shoulders were touching. He did not move away. I did not move away. When we came down, he was quiet in the way he was quiet when something had mattered to him, not sad quiet, full quiet, the quiet of someone sitting with something good. I was quiet the same way. We went inside, we made dinner, we sat at the table. The evening was everything the evening always was, and I thought about his shoulder against mine, and the valley described from above and below, and the specific feeling of sitting with something good. Chapter 10. He had been here for a year. I knew the anniversary was coming before it arrived. I had been aware of it the way you were aware of things that mattered without announcing they mattered. The leaves were turning again. The the specific quality of the air in early autumn. The morning I had found him at my gate with a pack over one shoulder looking up at me on the roof. The roof was fine, the fence was straight, the woodshed was full before it needed to be, the well worked, the garden had produced more than it had in years, the house was better than it had ever been in my memory. I was better than I had been, that was the thing I had not expected, not just more functional or less alone. Better, more present in my own life, more attentive to things, more willing to say what I thought when I thought it, more able to sit with good things without waiting for them to become less good. I had watched him for a year, and he had watched me for a year, and we had been honest with each other about almost everything, and the almost was the part I was thinking about. On the morning that was exactly 1 year from the morning he arrived, I went up on the roof, not because anything needed fixing, just because it was where I wanted to be. He came out into the garden and looked up. His silver hair caught the early morning light the same way it had a year ago. His blue eyes were the same depth. He looked exactly the same as he had looked when he arrived, and he would look exactly the same for a very long time, and I was aware of this, and I had decided it was not the most important thing. I said it was 1 year. He said he knew. I said I had been thinking about the year. He said he had been thinking about it too. I said I had something to say, and I was going to say it from up here because heights made me honest. I was not sure why, they just did. He said all right. I said the year had been the best year I could remember. I said that was not about the house being better or the work being shared. It was about him specifically. The quality of being in the same space as someone who paid attention, who said what he meant, who was honest even when honest was not comfortable, who had shown me things I had stopped seeing, who had planted seeds for the first time at several hundred years old and found it significant in a way that had made me find it significant too. I said I had felt something for several months that I had not known what to do with. I said I had decided that the thing to do with it was to say it, because not saying it was becoming a weight, and I did not want to carry it anymore. I said I did not know what it meant for him. I said I did not know what the mortal and not mortal thing meant practically, and I was not asking him to resolve it this morning. I said I was just saying what was true. I said I loved him. I said it simply. The word was the right word, and it did not need dressing. He was very still below me. The garden was doing what gardens did in early autumn. The leaves were turning. The air was the specific air of that season. A year ago he had come through the gate, and I had been on this roof, and everything had been different. He said my name, just my name, the way he said it when it was carrying more than just itself. He said he had been watching this valley for a long time. He said he had watched many things and had been present for many things and had felt many things across the years. He said the range of what he had felt was larger than most people's range by necessity. A long life had a large range. He said in that large range what he felt in this house in this year was specific and clear and not something he had felt before. He said it was not smaller for being in the range. He said the range made it clearer. You needed contrast to understand things. He had a great deal of contrast. He said he loved me. He said it the same way I had said it. Simply, the word was the right word. I sat on the roof and looked at him in the garden below, and the morning was doing the things mornings did, and the valley was being the valley, and the forest at the edge of it was being the forest. I said, "Come up." He came up the ladder. He sat beside me on the roof, the same place we had sat in summer, shoulder to shoulder, the valley spread out below us. I said I had questions, practical ones, about the not mortal thing and what it meant and how it worked and what we were supposed to do about the gap. He said he had answers. He said they were not all comfortable answers, but they were honest ones. I said that was what I wanted, honest ones. He said all right. He said we had time. I said we had time. We sat on the roof, and the morning was early, and the valley was below us, and the forest was at the edge, and the leaves were exactly the color they had been a year ago when he came through my gate and looked up at me. The house was sound, the garden was full, the woodshed was ready for winter. He was here, he had been here for a year, and he was going to keep being here, and I knew this the way I knew the things my grandmother had told me in those last months, carefully, and with the understanding that the words mattered, even when I did not yet know all of why. I leaned into him. He put his arm around me. The morning was a good morning. The year ahead was going to be a good year. That was enough. That was more than enough. That was everything. Epilogue. The second autumn was better than the first. I had not thought that was possible. The first year had been the year of understanding, and the year of the tile, and the year of February, and the year of planting seeds together for the first time, and the year of sitting on the roof in summer until the light was gone. I had not thought a second year could be better than that. It was better because we were no longer managing anything. The first year had been managed, not unhappily, not badly, but there had been things being navigated, the secret and the knowing and the not yet said and the careful space between chairs. All of it had taken a quality of attention that had also been a weight, a good weight, but a weight. The second year had none of that. We were simply here, in the house at the edge of the forest, doing the work the seasons required, sitting by the fire in the evenings, making food, reading, planting things in spring and harvesting them in autumn, and watching them through summer and putting the garden to bed in winter and starting again. He went to the forest sometimes. I knew what that meant now. He went and he was gone for a day or two, and when he came back, he had the specific quality of someone who had needed something and gotten it, recharged, clearer, more himself in the way that the human shape was his self but not the only one. I asked once what it was like, being the other thing, being what he actually was rather than the shape he wore in my yard and kitchen and on my roof. He was quiet for a long time, then he said it was like finally being the right size. I thought about that for a long time. He answered more of my questions across the second year, the practical ones I had said I had on the roof, the not mortal question and what it meant and what happened when I was old and he was the same. He answered them honestly. Some of the answers were hard. We sat with them the way we sat with hard things, without looking away, without pretending they were not hard. He said there were things that could be done, old things. He was careful about saying this. He said they were not things to decide quickly. He said we had time to understand what I wanted and what he could offer and what the shape of it could be. I said I knew. I said I was not in a hurry. He said he was not in a hurry either. That was true for him in a way it was not for most people. He had several hundred years of not being in a hurry. I found it mostly reassuring. On the morning of the second autumn, I went to the gate. I do not know what made me go to the gate on that specific morning. Some instinct, some memory of the year before. I went and I stood at it, and I looked at the lane that led from the village to the edge of the forest. He came and stood beside me. We looked at the lane together. I said I had been thinking about the tile, about the morning he arrived. He said he remembered it. I said I had been trying to fix it myself, and I had been failing, and he had come through the gate and fixed it in 30 seconds. He said yes. I said I had thought about that moment many times across the 2 years, the specific combination of me on the roof with the tile and him coming through the gate, how neither thing alone was the story, how both things together were. He said he had thought about it too. He said he had watched me fight with that tile for 20 minutes before he came through the gate. He said watching me fight with it was what had decided him. I said the tile had decided him. He said it was not the tile. He said it was that I had been up there alone on a roof that made me nervous fixing something by myself, and I had not stopped, and I had not asked for help, and the specific stubbornness of that had been the most human thing he had watched in a very long time, and he had found it remarkable. I turned and looked at him. He was looking at me with those blue eyes that were the color of deep water, and that had been watching this valley for a very long time, and had decided that this house and this woman and this specific morning a year ago were worth coming through a gate for. I said I was glad he had come through the gate. He said he was glad too. The second autumn was full and warm, and the garden was everything I had hoped when we planted it in spring. The house was sound. The woodshed was full. The forest was at the edge of the property being the forest, full of the things my grandmother had told me about and other things she had not known to mention. He was here. He had come through my gate a year ago and fixed my tile in 30 seconds and stayed, and the staying had been the best thing that had happened in this house in a very long time. I went back inside to make breakfast. He followed. The morning was a good morning. It was going to keep being good mornings. That was everything.